Welcome back, AP. All right, welcome back to it. Welcome back to y'all being super confused, apparently, right? So the big thing about it is, yes, this unit is a little all over the place, and yes, it's a little chaotic, and yes, we're going to learn a little tiny bit about Russia tomorrow, but it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine, okay? So we will review those things again tomorrow. You know, I'm always here, of course, to help you out, but the biggest thing you need to start doing is studying, right? Like, go ahead and start studying, getting ready, and kind of pushing forward, right? So the big thing we started off talking about in class was the unification of Germany. I'm going to try and speak a little bit slower and a little bit clearer and not get all hyped up and over-exaggerate and all this other stuff, so to see if the closed captions pop up for all of you little people that are just like, I need the transcript, Katie Tweet. Now, the big thing about it, though, is that we are talking about the unification of Germany, right? So when we were talking about it in class, we were talking about how there were three major regions of this thing at the time called the German Confederation, right? So what used to be Germany, like the idea of Germany or German-speaking people, the language of German, Deutsche, it's going to go through several different phases, right? It's originally the Holy Roman Empire, and then Napoleon destroys that, and then it becomes the Confederation of the Rhine under Napoleon, and then Napoleon gets exiled. And then it becomes the German Confederation, right? So the German Confederation is a little bit like a Holy Roman Empire with a different name because it's a loose coalition of states that are ran by princes and other like figures and political leaders and things like that. The largest of all those three political states inside the German Confederation are that of Prussia, that of Austria, and that of Bavaria. Okay, now Bavaria is in South Germany. They're mostly Catholic. They're very, very wealthy, right? Austria is Austria. They're mostly Catholic. They're super wealthy. They control a lot of people that aren't Austrian and don't speak German. So then there's Prussia, the military powerhouse, the country born from a cannonball, the place that only speaks German, and the place that has been industrializing rapidly, right? So the big thing about it is if you're going to bet on a horse to unify all the German people under one common flag, it's going to be that of Prussia. And they attempted to do this pretty early on. When they attempted to do this, it was in 1848 under their first or their more recent king slash emperor slash gutter crown guy, Frederick William IV, right? So Frederick William IV, though, refused his gutter crown, refused this constitutional liberal crown, and said, no, I just wanted the old Holy Roman Empire back, and I wanted more territory and more princes and more like nepotism and stuff like that. And so that was, of course, the Frankfurt Parliament, which was a very short-lived thing and only lasted for about a year and a half, right? So that's going to fail miserably. But the thing about it is that despite what Frederick William IV did or did not want out of his gutter crown, despite what Frederick William thought of the unification of Germany, despite what conservatives did or did not want, the idea of a unified Germany was growing along an economic line long before any of them were even talking about it. As far back as 1819, there was the creation of this thing called the Zollverein, right? The Zollverein is a German customs union that allowed different items from industrializing Prussia and other German states to be transported across borders without it being tolled or taxed, right? Now, the thing about it is that's going to create economic unification, but not nation-state, territorial, or national unification. The Zollverein was an important first step into becoming an identifying German group of people because you're making money equally off of each other. You all speak German, and you're believing in the idea of working together to form progress. Now, the interesting thing about the Zollverein, though, is the person that wasn't in it, the Austrians. The Austrians were not allowed to be in the Zollverein, mainly due to the fact that the Austrians were very protective of their industry. They were also very protective of the way they did things, and also because they were Catholic, and not to mention as well, they controlled a lot of non-speaking German people. So they're like, why be in a German customs union if y'all control Croatians and Serbians and Hungarians and all these other people, right? So you can see there's a little bit of animosity, and you can see that Prussia is going to start pushing everything forward. Now, after Frederick William IV dies, his brother, Wilhelm I, Hohenzollern, is going to take over, and he is going to be a pretty conservative guy, pretty conservative-leaning. He was known as the Prince of Grape Shot at one point because he was the one that in an 1848 revolution, he shot a bunch of German protesters and stuff like that. But he was inspired by the national revolts of Italy and the unification movement that was going on in Italy. But the problem is he didn't know how, much like Victor Emmanuel II, to really accomplish this. So he's going to have to go get his Count Cavour. And who does he go and get? A man by the name of Otto von Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck is going to be the German Chancellor, known as the Iron Chancellor, that unifies the German states together and creates what you now refer to as Germany, right? And Otto von Bismarck is going to come up in the next unit. He's going to be referred to in the last unit. He's like basically the most important European politician from 1848 and onward, outside of people like, outside of people like, oh my God, English Prime Minister. Why am I blanking? William Churchill, right? Outside of William Churchill, outside of Adolf Hitler, outside of Joseph Stalin, like that late 1800s like political figure, Otto von Bismarck, the refrigerator with legs, the 6'4" massive individual that he was, is going to be the guy that basically mushes Germany together. In a different kind of way, a lot of historians look at him as either the most genius person who had this whole thing planned out step by step ahead of time. A lot of other people look at him as the best improviser ever because he just kept reacting to situations perfectly, right? Now, the big thing is, though, he wants to nationalize Germany as well. He wants to see a consolidated German union so that Germans can grow together, and also so the economy and so the industry of Germany can grow faster, and also making it so you're no longer just the Kingdom of Prussia, that you would be instead the German Empire, right? Now, the big thing is, though, is Otto von Bismarck has to figure out how he's going to do this. Now, step one is he knows that war is going to result, right? He knows that being Prussian, that militarism is a big thing for us, right? Being militaristic, being born out of that cannonball, being an army with a state is still really important. So Otto von Bismarck wants to grow the military, so in case some violence pops up or wars get declared, while he's trying to consolidate all these German confederation states together, he needs to be ready. Now, the middle-class liberals that were inside of the German Confederation and also inside of Prussia were pretty much against militarism because it's going to cost money, it's going to cost them taxes, it's going to cause tampering in business, it could lead to a draft. It's just not their thing, right? So what does he do instead of asking for permission? He just does it anyway, right? He goes through the king. Wilhelm and Otto von Bismarck work together, and they begin to collect aggressive taxes to grow the Prussian military exponentially. They buy more guns, they buy more uniforms, and they buy more of these goofy little helmets called like Plughoffers or Plughüters or Plugauges or whatever the heck they're called. Now, the big thing about it, though, is they start building up, right? Now, the Iron Chancellor, as he is known, Otto von Bismarck, is sometimes looked upon very, very differently by very different people. Some people say he's a hero, people say he's kind of a villain. I think he's somewhere in between, right? I think he's somewhere in between because, of course, he knew that the unification of Germany was going to result in the death and the loss of human life, but he did it anyway, right? And also, at the same time, he's pretty conservative, so the poorer end of society is not the one he necessarily cares about the most. But he is going to make concessions for them and make their lives better. Like Otto von Bismarck is the very first one to bring in welfare programs successfully and have old age insurance and accidents insurance for workers in Prussia because he's like, look, educated workers and protected workers work better, right? So which is very interesting for a chancellor and for a conservative one of that to do. So this is what I'm saying. I think he's somewhere in between, right? Now, the biggest thing that he hates is the idea of a Republican-style Germany. He doesn't like the idea of a president or a prime minister ruling over everything. He loves the idea of still having a monarch, right? And that's why he wants to keep Kaiser Wilhelm and his family in charge, right? Kaiser Wilhelm I, he believes that he deserves to be king and he wants him to stay king, right? So he hates the idea of ruling through the parliament, which at the time, their new parliament is called the Landtag, right? Like Landtag, being like the legislative body of Prussia, and then as well as the legislative body of some of the other local like German states and stuff like that. He also has no intention of becoming Kaiser himself. He just wants to see Germany unified. This guy is probably the best practicer of realpolitik out of all of them, right? He is a realistic politician. He wants to return to the old monarchy, approved by the people, and he wants to find a middle ground somewhere, right? Now, he knows, though, that that middle ground is not going to be found peacefully, right? I think the biggest thing you got to understand about Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, is that he was well aware that war was going to result from these unification movements, right? Much like Cavour was well aware that war was going to be the only way to unify his country, right? Well, his northern country anyway. Now, the big thing about it, though, is then also Otto von Bismarck just has these money quotes. Like, he has so many great quotable things. For example, one of his famous quotes was, always keep two irons in the fire, as in basically always have multiple approaches to a problem, right? Another big one was, laws are a lot like sausages. Everybody likes them, but nobody wants to see them get made, right? Like so, and one of his most famous quotes, his probably most famous quote, is he said that the great questions of the day will not be decided by speeches and resolutions, they will be decided by blood and iron. So he is showing his militaristic prowess, and he believes that industry and war will be the things that bring Germans together, right? So the thing about it is, speaking of that unification movement, so we've already kind of like explored it a little bit, we know we're going to end up going to war. So the very first phase of this whole thing is a genius move, a chess move by Otto von Bismarck, and he's like, how can I basically figure out a way to gobble up a bunch of these North German states? How can I convince places like near Luxembourg, places like Hamburg and Frankfurt and like all these other places, Dusseldorf, how can I convince them to become a part of this new country that I am building? Well, an interesting little thing happened, and the big thing about Bismarck is he always wanted to seem as the savior of the Germans rather than the person coming in to take them over, right? He didn't want to go into Dusseldorf and be like, you're a part of us now, because that's going to make him look bad, right? He wanted to make it be like, look, I'm here to help you guys, right? And so an interesting little thing happens when the liberals of Prussia and the Landtag keep trying to reject his moves to unify Germany, right? They're trying to push back, but he's building up his army anyway, and he's basically ignoring them. But then something funny happens. Bismarck proved himself to the middle-class liberals by yet again appearing like the savior, right? Be the savior of the Germans. Be the protector of the German people. Don't be their oppressor. So what ended up happening is he gets into this war known as the Second Schleswig War, okay, of 1864, okay? Now, what ends up going down is this is about 3 years after Italy is unified, and what goes down is that Denmark is going to get really annoying really, really fast. So there are these two northern provinces of the German Confederation. One of them is in the German Confederation, the other one is not. But they both speak German, okay? And their places are called Schleswig and Holstein, okay? Say it with me now. Schleswig, Holstein. Schleswig, Holstein. Schleswig and Holstein speak German, but they were almost controlled by Denmark, right? So the big thing is after the Congress of Vienna, Schleswig and Holstein, or Schleswig in particular, was given to control of by the Danes, right? Like so, during the balance of power, Prince Clemens von Metternich, of course, helped give this little German-speaking province to the Danes to keep the balance of power correctly appropriated, right? The problem is, though, is what does Bismarck not like about this? Denmark shouldn't be owning any German-speaking people. Those people should be with a unified German state. And the big thing that happened is that the Danes tried to write a new constitution, which would have made Schleswig and Holstein permanent parts of their new country. And so basically, Bismarck says, not today, and then goes and gets Austria and says, hey, y'all speak German, we speak German. They're going to mess up everything, and they're going to take control of other Germans. So y'all come in and help us fight this war against the Danes, and we'll beat them swiftly, and then each of us will get one of them. We'll get Schleswig, you get Holstein, right? How's that sound? We get Schleswig, you get Holstein. And Austria considers this point for a little bit and says, this is a great idea. I would like to have some more territory in the German Confederation. So they enter into this war on the side of Prussia, right? And so Prussia and Austria versus Denmark now, right? Prussia and Austria go to war against Denmark. The war lasts 9 months. Boom! And they win, right? So now Schleswig belongs to Prussia and this northern German area, and Austria gets Holstein, right? And so now the big thing about it, though, that's happening is that Austria took a little bit of a bad agreement here. What Austria didn't realize is that, remember, they're not in the Zollverein. So every single time products or goods have to pass through a German-speaking state that is in the Zollverein, it gets taxed, it gets customs tolls on it, it gets all this other stuff. So Austria is starting to get really, really upset, basically saying to Prussia, hey, why would we do this? We could be a greater Germany together, right? So here is then adopted the German question, right? So the German question is when Germany becomes a country, is it going to be the greater Germany or Große Deutschland with Austria at the helm, which would make a Germany much, much larger, but would also include a lot of Croatians and Serbians and Bosnians and other people in it that don't speak German? Or do we want to go with the approach of the lesser or little Germany, the Klein Deutschland, right? Which has got Prussia at the lead and only has German-speaking people inside of it, right? Well, the thing about it is Bismarck kind of paces around his office and he's like, Austria ain't going to be in charge of doodly squat that I'm in charge of. And my guy, Kaiser Wilhelm I, will be the king of this new Germany. So you know what, Austria? get the heck out of here. So now what he has to do is he has to figure out how to rid Austria out of Holstein. How does he get Austria out of the German Confederation, push them out completely, and start creating a new big block of German states up top in the northern area of Germany? So what he has to do is he's going to accuse the Austrians of treating them like enemies, right? They're going to accuse the Austrians of basically being like, hey, you're attacking us, you're coming at us, why are you doing this, etc., etc. Now, the big thing that ends up going down, though, is the Austro-Prussian War is a very important war, okay? What ends up happening is they declare the war on the lines of like, you Catholic people are oppressing our Protestant people, all these other things, because it is a big thing to remember two things. One, they're going to use religion and also Austria's control of a bunch of other non-speaking German people, non-German people on their side and be like, you shouldn't own territory in this area because you don't care about the Germans, you care about more power and more land, right? They also accuse them of like impressing their Catholic faith, etc., etc. But Otto von Bismarck has to do something very important. He has to fight this war against the Austrians as fast as possible to make it so it can stay localized. Because if he gives enough time for the Russians, who aren't going to fight with the Austrians after they didn't side with them in the Crimean War, or to prevent the French from coming in, he has to do this very quickly. But the thing about it is the French aren't going to join the Austrians. They just got done fighting them with the Italians. And the Russians are not going to go with the Austrians because they declared themselves neutral in the Crimean War. Now, the big reason, though, why this was so localized and why this war only lasted 7 weeks before the Austrians lost, a lot of it has to do with military technology. So the guns being carried by each army really is going to turn the tide of a lot of things, okay? So this is what ends up happening. This is the gun that was carried by the Germans. And it's called the Dreisse breech-loading needle gun, whereas the Austrians were carrying a musket, all right? So, like, now the thing about it is, let's talk about these two weapons, right? So the thing about it is a Dreisse needle gun is a breech-loading gun. So what I mean by that is, do you see this bolt right here, okay? You grab that, turn it sideways, pull it backwards, and then you take the bullet for the Dreisse needle gun, which looks like a little acorn in a little paper pack. You slide it in the back of the barrel in this little chamber right here, push the bolt forward, and inside of the bolt is a firing pin that is spring-loaded. So when you pull the trigger, firing pin lurches forward, launches the bullet out, and like explodes the gunpowder in it, and zoom! And it is now the very first semi-automatic rifle. An untrained Prussian can fire 6 to 10 shots per minute with a Dreisse breech-loading needle gun. The best Austrians in the world, or the best soldiers in the world, could only fire 2 shots a minute out of a musket because it takes so long to load, right? So this is what I was talking about too as well as when it comes to Prussian industrialization. The Prussians had some of the best engineers, scientists, and industry going on. And so Dreisse is the man that actually invented this gun, and it actually basically superseded the musket completely. The musket, you have to take the ramrod out and pour everything in and just keep jamming it down there, and you can only pull off about, maybe if you're lucky, 2 well-aimed shots per minute, right? Maybe if you're lucky, and that's if everything goes according to plan. But an untrained soldier can let off 6 with this, so you're basically making your entire army look a lot bigger. So that gun is going to be a really big reason why the Prussians come in and just beat the daylights out of the Austrians. So the Austro-Prussian War, Prussia absolutely overruns Austria. Just completely overruns them, pushes them out of the north of Germany, and then they create this thing known as the North German Confederation, right? They're like, Austria, get out, right? Like, get out, stay in Austria, mind your own business, because we don't want anything to do with you anymore, right? So, like, now, not anything to do with you anymore necessarily, because there's going to be a world war, and then the Austrians are going to pick them, but blah, 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 blah. But, like, anyway, in the long run, they push them out, and they're like, you're going to allow us to start growing as a Germany, and you're going to mind your own business, right? Now, again, had the big kerfuffle with the Crimean War not really set up all this, like, diplomatic tensions, this could have gone a lot differently, right? Now, Prussia, though, since they absolutely overrun them, now created a brand new country after this thing called the Peace of Prague, known as the North German Confederation, right? The armistice was very generous to Austria as well to prevent them from being hated allies forever, right? The Germans, again, realpolitik, Bismarck being the genius that he is, was basically like, look, Austria,
we're not going to embarrass you, all right? So, like, you're going to give us this little province that you really didn't want anyway, which is a giant pain in the butt to hold on to, because Holstein was so far away and you aren't in the Zollverein, right? So you don't have to pay us any war reparations. You're not going to lose any real territory except for Venice, okay, which is going to go back to Italy because the Italians are going to support the Prussians in their unification movement, right? And then Austria, you're going to have to withdraw from what we're doing, right? Like, just mind your own business. Do not side with anybody coming against us, and just let us be a part of this whole thing. And Austria looked at its empire and looked at all of its Croatians and Serbians and Hungarians and was like, well, yeah, go ahead, Klein Deutschland. Grosse Deutschland is a dead dream, right? So going forward, Bismarck now has to try and tame his parliament, right? So the big thing about it is the North German Confederation is going to be established. So we got some maps on deck now, right? So look, that right there is the Germany that has been now created after the Austro-Prussian War. As you can see, we're still missing some chunks of territory down here, but we'll get into the South German state, Bavaria, here in a minute. But the thing about it is that Bismarck knows that as he continues to grow, realistically, he has to keep those middle-class liberals happy. He can't just come in and be like, we are now an absolute monarchy, because he knows that it's not going to work, and then he's going to have a revolution of 1848 situations on his hands. So what he decides to do is meet those liberals in the middle, right? As the country grows, he decides to meet the liberals of all these territories that he's gobbling up in the middle. They enter into this North German Confederation agreement, and so what they decide to do is, like, one, we are going to consolidate the principalities into states, and you get to keep your local government, right? You have to swear allegiance to the North German Confederation and to Prussia being the leader of this entire thing. Also, Bismarck gave universal suffrage to all men in the North German Confederation over the age of 25. Which is a really big deal. Now, granted, I would like to see it more like 21, but he says 25 to give an appropriate amount of time for military service if they can pull it off, right? Now, the other big thing is he establishes this thing known as the Reichstag. The Reichstag is now the national, located in Berlin, going to be the national legislative house, right? Bismarck is going to be the only responsible to the Kaiser, which is going to give him the basic chance of being able to do whatever he wants with the Kaiser Wilhelm and be able to ignore this Reichstag should they so choose. The genius here is that just like Napoleon III, Bismarck has secretly set up a system where he makes the liberals think that they have a say, when all in reality, all the real power really lays with him, the Kaiser, and the military. Because now, with this new constitution, him and Wilhelm can go fight any war that they feel like, right? And they don't have to necessarily get approval from the Reichstag. The Reichstag is there to be an elected body to give the national, feeling of Germany positive, vibes, right? Like, to make the people of Germany feel like they have, a huge say, right? When in reality, Bismarck and Wilhelm have all the real power, right? So going forward, though, now you've got one other issue, right? And you gotta get the Bavarian region. So you got this chunk left over. This you got from the, Schleswig-Holstein War, the Second Schleswig War. This you got from the Austro-Prussian War, but you still got this orange right here. And that's Bavaria right there, okay? Bavaria is going to have to be delicately brought in. Because the problem leading into a war called the Franco-Prussian War is how the heck do you get Catholic Germany in the south, Bavaria, how do you get Bavaria to join up with, North Germany? They're very wealthy, they're independent, they have a Catholic faith, they've got beautiful castles like Castle Neuschwanstein, they've got all this different stuff. Why would they ever want to be joining you when they could actually autonomously rule themselves, right? Well, you again have to be able to create a situation where basically the Germans look at you and the Bavarians look at you like the savior and look at other people like the enemy, right? And so what does he do? He picks a fight, right? So remember, he has to get this region to join with that region, and so what he wants to do is push France into a war, right? Let's do this in a way that makes France look like the aggressor, right? How are we going to make this happen? Because Bismarck taunts them, okay? Bismarck is like a 2-year-old that stands at a line or goes up to France. It's like, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, just waiting for France to slap them back, right? Now, Bismarck, by this point, has become an expert in mass media. He knows how to use the newspaper. He knows how to use a lot of different avenues to grow his message and his ideas. So he taunts the French into war by publishing newspaper articles that make fun of French people, calling them boorish and disgusting. And then also, there's this thing called the Ems telegram, right? So what ends up happening is there's a secession crisis in Spain, right? And in Spain, they offer the throne to one of Wilhelm's relatives, right? A guy named Leopold. And he is a Hohenzollern by marriage, right? So like he is related to the King of Prussia. And so the idea that is freaking out the French is, do we want to have a Hohenzollern here and a Hohenzollern there? Probably not, right? So the French send a telegram to Wilhelm saying, tell your cousin not to take the throne of Spain because it's going to upset the balance of power and we don't want to have to like do anything rash or ridiculous. The telegram was sent to this place called Bad Ems. Bad Ems is where Wilhelm used to take his summer vacation. It's a spa town. It's a very beautiful one of that still to this day. Now at Bad Ems, Wilhelm sees this telegram, looks at it, writes a telegram to Bismarck saying we are going to basically figure out a peaceful way to not ignore the French completely, but we're going to figure out a way to prevent war from happening and also be diplomatic. Bismarck gets this telegram, looks around and goes, and he edits the telegram to make it look like Wilhelm is saying, French people, go away. You're right? Like, so like, mind your own business. And he edits the telegram and then publishes it in the newspaper. This infuriates the French and infuriates Napoleon III, and a war breaks out. And the war only lasts for 1 year. War broke out in the South German states. Catholic Bavaria is going to fully support Prussia because France declared war on Germans. And then Bismarck can now look at the Bavarians and be like, do you see how they're just coming at us? All we did was just tell them to go home and mind their own business. Bavaria then now supports Prussia. The German forces overwhelmed the French because they had better railways and they had a very large army, right? The Prussians even had a huge battle in 1871 called the Battle of Sedan, captured Napoleon III and humiliated him. And what's going to happen now is France is going to have another revolution, and they're going to be like, we don't have an emperor anymore, we're now the Paris Commune. And they have a communist revolution in Paris, right? Riots in the Paris Commune break out, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. France is going to surrender after a 7-month starvation program. So the Prussians broke all the way into France, they get all the way around Paris, they blockade the entirety of the city, and what ends up happening, they're like, we're not going to go kill women and children in Paris because that's not the Germany we're trying to create here. They set up a huge blockade around Paris and they starved them out. The Parisians were forced to eat zoo animals to actually stay alive. What a French thing to do. They even have menus of it. You can see the hors d'oeuvres are like basically rats and sardines. You've got cuts of elephant right here. You've got your entree being like kangaroo. You've got all this other stuff. I know like Annabelle is probably looking at that right now being like, oh, that's crazy. And then like also the Grande Butcheria, which means the large butcherer of dogs. There was a butcher shop for dogs made in Paris while the Prussians blockaded them in the Franco-Prussian War. And they were like, nope, Napoleon III, you're not our king anymore, right? It's a very chaotic time, but in the long run, Prussia wins. Kaiser Wilhelm is then, in the biggest insult on the planet, going to be proclaimed the emperor of the new German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. This is so embarrassing for the French, right? They then force the French to pay 5 billion francs in reparations, which is going to make the French very upset. The Germans are now going to hate each other. And also another big thing is the Germans go up to the French and say, and you know that little territory you have called Alsace-Lorraine? Gimme. And they take this little border region that speaks both German and French called Alsace-Lorraine, and they gobble it up into their empire. Just remember Alsace-Lorraine going forward. But that is the unification of Germany. We will review that right after we talk a little bit of stuff about Russian modernization tomorrow. But I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.